Hey everyone, how's it going? Matthew Bailey Media here, and welcome to my video where I do my top 10 worst movies of 2023. Yep, it's that time of year again. It's the end of the year, and now we're just going to be doing. Now, I'm going to do this video first for the top 10 worst, mainly because I did take a little bit longer to do my best movies of the year, mainly because I did see a lot more movies than I thought I would. But in this video, we're doing the worst. And before I get into my official list, I want to give a shout out to a few dishonorable mentions or whatever. And those dishonorable mentions are Mafia Mama, Champions, and Shazam 2 Fury of the Gods. Now, those are the movies that I thought were not as good as I was hoping they'd be, but they ended up that they thankfully are not my worst movies of the year. So without further ado, let's get into my list for the top 10 worst movies of 2023. So at number 10, this movie was something that I honestly thought would be good, and then it turned out to be a huge disappointment, and that is The Flash. Yep, The Flash is the movie that came out this year that I thought I was going to enjoy it, but then it turned out to be a huge disappointment, but not as much of a disappointment as I thought another movie was that's in the same universe. We'll get to that movie later, but in this scenario, The Flash, I gotta admit, I can see why it didn't do so well, not just box office wise, but mainly because of what the fans were thinking when they went to see this movie. And that's regarding the whole Ezra Miller controversies that have been surrounding the movie, and how they say it was supposed to be like a soft reboot to the DCU, but technically that actually is going to start now after the most recent movie came out, which again we'll get to in a little bit on this list. But with The Flash, I gotta say, I loved seeing Michael Keaton back as Batman. It's funny because I never watched the movies that he was in until most recently over the last few years. I actually watched the two movies that Michael Keaton was in, mainly because of the pandemic and everything, so I figured, why not get into them? But when he was in this movie, I swear, it seemed like they gave him the Luke Skywalker treatment that like Disney did with the sequel trilogy. Basically, they had him the first time we see Michael Keaton's Bruce Wayne, he's like all washed up, his hair's all long, he's got a beard, and it's not until after he realizes what Ezra Miller's Barry Allen is saying that he shaves it up, and then he gets into his iconic Batman outfit, and it's just like, honestly, that was kind of weird. And to make things even crazier, there's a scene at the end of the movie where they get a peek into the multiverse at different actors playing the characters, like they saw the very first guy to play Superman, who I think was already dead by the time this movie was filmed, so I don't know how they were able to do that with. I mean, they could have just taken his face and like CGI'd it onto somebody that made it look like him, because they did that with Harold Ramis in Ghostbusters Afterlife, and it's still, because he didn't have a speaking role, it was totally okay with that. Now, another cameo as for an actor who was portraying a superhero where we never got to see their adaptation of it was Nicolas Cage as Superman. If you think I'm joking, that is an insane thing to be joking about, because turns out there really was a Nicolas Cage Superman movie that would have been made by Tim Burton, and it never got off the ground. And to be fair, I think whatever creature Nicolas Cage as Superman was fighting in the scene where we get a glimpse of him, it was like, I think even Tim Burton and Nicolas Cage themselves said that was not the original plan. Like, we weren't going to have a scene like that happen, and I thought it was insane. But again, Flash, I gotta say, was not the best movie, but it's definitely not the worst movie that's from the DC universe. Again, we'll get to that later. But for now, I gotta go with my number 10 being The Flash. So, at my number 9 spot, now this is of course another superhero movie that's not from DC, however, it is from Marvel, that I thought could have been a decent movie, especially if it, because it was sort of introducing like the next big bad of the entire MCU, and that is Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. Now, this is the third movie of the trilogy for Ant-Man, and this was supposed to be the. It's funny enough, this was the first movie to be released in Phase 5, and we then, and again, like I said, it was supposed to introduce the next major threat to the Avengers, which was Kang the Conqueror, played by at the time Jonathan Majors. But recently this year, with his whole legal troubles going on, where they all started in March, like a month after the movie's release, they decided to honestly, after he was finally charged earlier this year, like a month or so ago, with 2 out of 4 of the charges he was charged with. He unfortunately got fired, and now they're gonna decide. I mean, they're still gonna use the Kang character in some way, but it sounds like they're gonna recast Kang with somebody who looks similar to Jonathan Majors, but not necessarily looks like him. Plus, I mean, they've got 3 main Kang variants that they could use, like that are part of leaders of the Council of Kangs, and they basically, I mean, they could get one specific actor to take over the role of I forgot that Kang's name, who like has that big hat in the post-credits scene for Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. And then you have the Rama Tut version, and then you have the crap. I keep forgetting the name of these 3 Kangs, but one specific Kang that they're rumored to be using now is a version of the Beyonder, but that is a Kang variant, where basically he defeats the Council of Kangs at some point in time as the Beyonder, and then he goes up against the Avengers in whatever the 5th movie may end up being. Then he ends up losing to Doctor Doom, who we heard will be showing up in the MCU now eventually as the main villain of Secret Wars. So I'm curious to see how well this new change ends up working out for the MCU, and I'm hoping that they get some other actor to play the Beyonder variant, maybe somebody who can replace the Rama Tut and Scarlet Centurion, I think is the name of that other variant, that looks like Jonathan Majors. I mean, heck, they could probably get one guy, I forgot his name, but he played Finn in the Star Wars universe. He can play that variant, while somebody else plays the Rama Tut version, and somebody else plays the one in the middle that was out of the 3 of them. And then get somebody to play the Beyonder variant. But anyways, in regards to this movie, I thought it was a great film. Now, it's not necessarily the worst Marvel movie of this year, but we'll get to that one in a little bit. But for now, for number 9, I gotta go with Ant-Man 3. So, for my number 8 listing on this worst movies of the year list, I gotta go with a movie that honestly I did not think was gonna be like one of the worst movies of this year, because it was supposed to be like the conclusion to this franchise, and I thought, well, how could they possibly screw this up? But of course they did, and that is Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, aka Indiana Jones 5. Now, this is the only movie that came out of the Indiana Jones universe to not be directed by Steven Spielberg. And it was the only Indiana Jones movie that was made under the Disney banner, unfortunately, because, funny enough, Indiana Jones, the IP, is owned by Lucasfilm, and they were bought out by Disney in 2012, literally like a few years after the release of Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. Now, that movie was originally the worst out of the entire franchise, but that is until this movie came along and pretty much screwed it up even more. And I gotta say, I really do not like the fact that they did, again, just like with Luke Skywalker, they took Indiana Jones himself, played by Harrison Ford, and basically shoved him to the sideline or made him seem like this weak character in his own movie and made a female-led character, played by Phoebe Waller-Bridge, sort of drag him along for the ride, but he just seemed like he didn't want to be there. And I gotta say, they could have easily saved the movie a little bit for me by what they were doing in the finale of the film, where he wanted to stay in the past and just live out the rest of his life there. But then what does Phoebe Waller-Bridge's character do? Knocks him out and brings him back to the present, and he was all like, "What did you do? I wanted to live out peacefully," and because of how bad the rest of the movie was going, and they had to screw it up. And then he still ends up being alive in the end. However, he does seem like he retired, and he's gonna probably give the new generation to somebody else to play the character. But honestly, they completely screwed up the finale with the way it was going. I feel like this movie would have been a dishonorable mention had they not screwed up that finale, and that's why it ended up in the top 10, specifically at number 8. So, like I said, that's not the worst of it, though. We'll get to a lot of the other worst movies in a second, but for number 8, I gotta go with Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. So, for number 7, this movie, I honestly thought it was going to be enjoyable, but then when I saw what some of the backlash was going on and why I thought it was going to be something that I thought I would enjoy, but it turns out there was a lot of political stuff shoved into it, and that is Peter, Pan, and Wendy. Yep, this is the first actual Disney live-action remake to end up on a worst movies of the year list. Literally, I think this is literally the first movie that's considered a live-action remake for a Disney classic that ends up on my worst movies of the year list. And I gotta say, Peter Pan and Wendy was a weird thing to call it. I don't know why they didn't just call it Peter Pan, because, I mean, the whole story is about Peter Pan and his rivalry with Captain James Hook, who, now I will say, Jude Law as Captain Hook was the only good thing about this movie. He was like the only good actor playing the character, and however, the backstory between him and Peter was apparently a lot different than what we normally would get. They basically made it to where he was also a lost boy, and he was the same age as Peter before James decided he wanted to grow up, and he was not very happy with Peter. Or Peter was not very happy with James, so that when he came back trying to reconnect with Peter, what did he do? That's why he decided to cut off the hand of Hook and feed it to the crocodile, which I don't even think we saw the crocodile in this movie. That's the one thing I was a little upset about, is that we didn't even see the crocodile in this film. At least I don't think we did. It's been a while since I saw the movie, so I don't really remember. And then they had this whole thing with Wendy's character, pretty much when she first gets to Neverland, and then they also kind of screwed up the Lost Boys, where they introduced a bunch of girl characters and even had them be race difference. You had some characters who were white and some who were black, and it was just completely identity politics in this movie. And I gotta say, this is kind of one of the reasons why I decided to put it on my worst movies of this year, because I thought I was going to enjoy it, but again, it turned out to be such a disappointment. So for number 7, I gotta go with Peter Pan and Wendy. So for my number 6 slot, now just like I mentioned at the beginning of this video with my number 10, this is of course a movie that honestly I'm just so glad they finally have released it. So now we're going to be totally starting over with this franchise, and that is Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom, aka Aquaman 2. Now, this movie I recently just saw a couple days ago, about a week or so ago, with my cousin, Tyler Bailey, who, if y'all don't know who he is, he's been in a few of my videos in the past. He did one short film with me and my friend on YouTube, Matthew Davis Media, called Trapped, that we did back in 2020. Keep an eye out, or go back and watch that video. He also helped filmed the other short film I did, which was Ghost, with me and Matthew Davis. He's been in a few videos where he's reviewed things with me, like Goosebumps 1 and 2, Spirit Untamed, just to name a few. But we both saw Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom together, and I gotta say, this movie is just, I'm kind of relieved that they finally released it. It's not doing so well at the box office, and I would know because I work at the movies. But honestly, it just got beat out recently. Like, even Christmas weekend, on Christmas, it was actually beaten out by not just The Color Purple, but it got beaten out by Wonka, literally the day after Christmas, where it was Color Purple, Wonka, and then Aquaman, which is no surprise. It's literally, that was just its opening weekend too. It was in second place during Christmas Day behind The Color Purple, but unfortunately, that it literally got bumped out of number 2 by Wonka, which that movie is definitely a lot better, in my opinion, than Aquaman. But honestly, it just sucks that Jason Momoa had to go through all this, because again, it really isn't his fault that this movie tanked at the box office. It's mainly to do with one specific actress in there who seems to not learn her lesson even after the movie's released finally, and that's Amber Heard, which, if y'all remember from what I said over a year and a half ago, I will always be Team Johnny Depp. Johnny Depp is a much better actor than Amber Heard. She is just, like, recently I found out that after the movie's release, because of the poorly received box office, what is Amber Heard's response? Telling fans to shut up. Does that sound like somebody who should be continued to be in the DC universe after that? So I think since this is the last movie of the DCEU, I'm really excited to see what James Gunn has to bring forward for the DCU. They took the E out and just put DCU, which is kind of like the MCU, but I'm really curious to see how much of a difference there will be with those movies versus the DCEU. So for number 6, I gotta go with Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom. So for my number 5, now we're into my top 5 worst movies. This movie, again, just like the last movie I just talked about with Aquaman, this movie is honestly the lowest rated movie of this entire universe, and hopefully they do something to it sounds like they are trying to bring stuff back on track with the MCU, where we're only going to be getting one movie next year, and that's Deadpool 3. But I'm really excited for that, but unfortunately this movie did little to impress me, and that is The Marvels, aka Captain Marvel 2. They originally were going to call it Captain Marvel 2, but for some reason they decided to change the title, put more female characters in there with her, and they just, for some reason, they did not want to call it Captain Marvel 2 because they think it doesn't really fit well with what they're doing. And I gotta say, I honestly thought this movie was, I will say, it was a little bit more energetic than the first Captain Marvel, but I gotta say, it still did not impress me. I mean, they really, and plus, they say that this movie was supposed to take place after the events of both WandaVision, Miss Marvel, and funny enough, Secret Invasion. But clearly, the Nick Fury we see in this movie is not the same Nick Fury we saw at the end of Secret Invasion, it seems like. And I gotta say, I don't know where their future plans are gonna go for this film, or for the character of Captain Marvel to begin with. Hopefully, once they eventually reach the MCU reboot that they're gonna do after Secret Wars, hopefully then we'll see a whole lot more things be more comic accurate than they were so far in this phase, or this saga, which is the multiverse saga. But again, it sounds like they're trying to right the ship, so to speak, with only having one movie come out next year with Deadpool 3, and then we're still going to get movies like Captain America 4, Thunderbolts, Fantastic Four, and Blade in 2025. Not necessarily in that order. I think it's Captain America first and then Blade last. But I really hope that they fix the Marvel Universe after this movie, and we'll see how well Deadpool 3 ends up doing. But for number 5, I gotta go with The Marvels. So for my number 4 movie, I gotta say I'm not technically I think I can't say the actual name of the movie officially. So I think I've heard other people call it this specific name before, and they were okay with that. So I'm just gonna call it by what other people have called it. For my number 4 worst movie of the year, I gotta go with White Sugar Bear or something. But you know what I mean by the white sugar part. I can't say the word out loud, but I figured I need to call it what other people have said, which is the white sugar segment of the title. Now, the reason why this movie is on my worst movies of the year list is mainly because, again, like a lot of movies, it didn't really interest me. I wasn't even planning on seeing this movie. Thankfully, though, I decided once it was released on streaming, I thought, you know what the heck, I'll give this movie a whirl, and turns out it really was not something I was a fan of. And I mean, to be fair, it's based off of a true story, but I don't think it fully explains like what happened after the end of this movie. And this is the first true story related movie that I'm just like, why did this movie even get made? Because it seems like things were just not done well with this movie, and I can't believe I have to not even call it by its current name of the title of the movie. So that's why I had to give it the white sugar part instead. And I'm just hoping that there are better things to come out that are better than what this movie was. But thankfully, this was not the worst movie that was based off of a thing that I just cannot believe they did this with. But for number 4, I gotta go with, again, White Sugar Bear. So for my number 3 movie, now we're into my top 3. This movie, I gotta say, I don't even know what the point of this movie was, because it didn't even seem like it was that entertaining of a story, and that is Knock at the Cabin. Yep, Knock at the Cabin was a movie that came out earlier this year. I believe it was in February, and I gotta say, it was around the same time as White Sugar Bear. I almost said the other title, but with Knock at the Cabin, it starred some pretty decent people. Like, it actually had Ron Weasley himself, Rupert Grint, in this movie. We had Dave Bautista, which I thought was interesting. But unfortunately, I don't know what the point of this movie was when it comes to its story. It didn't tell any story that I thought was interesting, and it was just about this cabin and these, funny enough, it was 2 dads and a daughter in a cabin that was in the middle of the woods. They apparently were gonna have to choose somebody to die in their group, otherwise bad things would keep happening around the world, and even the people who were trying to tell them they'd have to kill somebody would have had to kill themselves too. And I think that was just weird. But again, I'm hoping that both Rupert Grint and Dave Bautista do much better projects than what they did in this movie, because this was clearly not their best work. So for number 3, I gotta go with Knock at the Cabin. So for my number 2 worst movie of the year, it was really, actually, now that I think about it, it really wasn't that much of a competition with which movie ended up being my worst. But with this movie, I thought it was something that, again, I didn't even see the first movie of this series in theaters either, but I thought the first movie was way better than what we got here, and that is Meg 2: The Trench. Yep, this is the sequel to The Meg from, I think it was 2018 that it came out. And I gotta say, I don't know what their deal was with making this sequel, because clearly it barely focused on the Meg at all in this movie. There was like some octopus type thingy that was also released into the open ocean, not just the Megs, and I thought it was weird that they did that. And I gotta say, I know this is based off of a book series, but really, what on earth is there left to talk about it after this movie? Because clearly this movie was not something I was very fond of. And again, I liked the first movie, but this movie was kind of a much greater letdown the first movie, but as you may be wondering, this is not my worst movie of the year because it's at number 2. So what movie could possibly have been my worst movie of this year that I thought needed to be talked about? Well, brace yourselves, because I didn't think I would see this movie, but when it came out on Peacock, I thought, let me just quickly watch it and be done, because I know my friend Matthew Davis Media saw this film, and I think even my cousin Tyler saw this movie before me, and I'm just like, you know what? I have a feeling this is going to be like just the same view as they did. So let's get into what my number 1 movie that was the worst for this year. So, for my number 1 worst movie of this year, you probably have guessed it by now when I said that my friend Matthew Davis Media and my cousin Tyler Berry have seen this movie already, and they saw it before me in theaters, as a matter of fact, and they both thought this was like the worst movie, I think, and that is, of course, yep, Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey. Yeah. So, what is there to say about this movie? What the heck were these people thinking about making this movie? It's based off of Winnie the Pooh, a great children's character based off of a children's book. And yet they turned it into a horror film where Pooh and Piglet weren't even a bear and a pig. They were just people dressed up in a bear outfit and a piglet outfit, and they didn't even look like actual bears and like an actual yellow bear or actual piglet, except for Piglet. I think Piglet's face looked more like a pig than Pooh did, but it sounds like they've changed that though when it comes to the looks of them in the second movie, which, yeah, funny enough, there's a second movie that is already being made, and I don't know who made this movie or why their heads are where they are with this film, but Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey was like the worst movie ever this year. You may find that shocking that I would see this type of movie. Again, if I had not seen Blood and Honey, Meg 2 would have been my number 1 worst movie. But this movie was way worse because, again, it's based off of a children's character. And rumor has it that the same studio who was making Blood and Honey are even thinking about making other movies based off movie characters that are children based into horror icons, which I think they already did this one with the Grinch. They are going to do it with Bambi, supposedly, and they're even going to do it with Peter Pan, because apparently they're in the public domain now. What the heck are these people thinking? Just because they're in the public domain doesn't mean they deserve to be made into a horror film. But anyways, yeah, so for my number 1 worst movie of the year, it's Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey. So there you have it, everybody. Those are my picks for the top 10 worst movies of 2023. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I had 3 dishonorable mentions, which were Shazam 2, Champions, and Mafia Mama. Now, thankfully that I'm done with the worst movies. It won't be until the start of next year that I'll probably post my best movies of 2023. So keep an eye out for that video whenever I post it, because the movies that are on that list are way better than what I thought I was going to do for that list. So anyways, that's all for now in this video for the top 10 worst movies of 2023, and as always, I will see all you guys in the next video.